Out and About. Entertainment, culture, interesting facts, and much, much more in a brand new program brought to you by Marina Kosareva.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Out and About. A couple of weeks ago, I told you about the International Festival, Fashion and Style in Photography, which is currently being held at the Moscow House of Photography right here in the capital. There are Russian as well as foreign photographers taking part, and I had the pleasure of meeting some of them already. Well, this week we get to explore the work of another photographer who came to Moscow to speak about his work. His name is Cambridge Jones, and let me tell you, he is one of the most interesting people I've met so far. Cambridge Jones has made portraits for some of the most famous people in the world, like Ozzy Osbourne, P. Diddy, Al Pacino, and Shirley Bassey. And it doesn't stop there. He's also had the privilege to photograph men and women in power, like the Queen of England, her son Prince Charles, and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Well, I got the amazing opportunity to meet Cambridge Jones, so I rushed to the Multimedia Art Museum to ask him a couple of questions. I have to say, he was one of the nicest men I've ever had the pleasure of interviewing. He was very relaxed and welcoming, so it made the whole conversation really pleasant, and the time just flew by. The first question I had in mind, even before I met him, was how does a man get to have one of the most interesting jobs in the world? Here's what he had to say about how it all started.
I was given a camera for my 15th birthday and I thought, oh, that's a shame. I was looking forward to a stereo. I remember it was an Olympus OM10, but I have a very bad memory. I was adopted as a child, and in order to make up for that bad memory, I would take photographs of everybody and everywhere I went, literally. And I have back at my home in Wales, at my parents' farm, about probably 500 albums of people I knew when I was a kid. And if you start taking that many photographs, you eventually have to work out how to make them more interesting or better, because otherwise you just get more and more bad photographs. So I think I learned by boring myself with the number of bad photographs. And I thought, how do you make this one more interesting? Or I'd meet you and I'd take 10 pictures of you and I'd think, actually, no, that one works, the one where she's next to the tree or something. And so I taught myself in a sense. But interestingly, it was through bad memory, because my interest in photography is visual, but it comes about through a much more pragmatic need to record stuff as time goes by.
So you record absolutely everything?
I did. Now I find that in my private time, I don't want to pick up a camera. So I noticed on the way here that other people were taking pictures, but I just couldn't be bothered, which is terrible, because there's so many interesting things in Moscow. But I will. After the work is done today, I will then walk around with a camera and do it properly.
You've photographed some of the most famous people in the world. Who has been the most interesting?
I'm glad you asked that question, because the one I usually get asked is, who is the most horrible?
No, I wouldn't do that.
So already we know that journalists in Russia are nicer than in England. I think Al Pacino is extraordinary, because I went to his house in Los Angeles and he opened the door and it was just like he's quite old now, but there was no sense of star or actor about him. He was just a really intellectual man who wanted to talk about Oscar Wilde and London and history, and it was such a refreshing time to have. The sun was out and we just sat around his pool in the garden. And I almost forgot to take the pictures, because he's so, he literally wanted to talk about the greatest living minds and what Shakespeare meant and what the philosophical views of the world were in different countries. And then eventually I thought, you know what, we should take your portrait. And I don't think they're my best, because I was too interested in him. Because you have to be interested in people to do this job. But sometimes you get too interested and then you forget you've got a job to do.
And technically speaking, who's the most photogenic?
I'm very proud of some pictures of a singer called Jack White from a band called the White Stripes in Nashville. Now, you might think he isn't photogenic, because he often has a lot of weight on and he's got some quite bad photographs. And I was told when I went to shoot him that he was a difficult person to work with and that he was very creative. I shouldn't say this, he'll hear this voice. But that he was very specific about what he liked, and he would tell him, I said, I've got these ideas, I've got the idea of him standing on this thing or swinging off, and they said, well, I don't know about that, Jack's very specific. And the interesting thing about it was, I don't know why, but we just clicked. And when you click with somebody, the best way, I think, to make portraiture is to understand the the person and then to work with them to find out what works. So I might meet you now and we'd spend time talking and working out how we interacted. And so the portraits of Jack I've got, I think, are, and I don't say this about all my portraits, but I think they're the best photos I've seen of Jack, and I'm very proud. And he, for some reason, he was very photogenic with me, and I've seen him not be very photogenic. He's in that film with the Rolling Stones, and he just looks sort of older and, I don't know, I'll stop there.
Out and about.
Today I am talking about British photographer Cambridge Jones. He takes stunning pictures of regular people as well as famous ones. But as we all know, there are a lot of photographers who do the same. Very few get access to prime ministers, Hollywood legends, and a queen, granted. But I was curious to find out what he thinks it is about his work that makes such powerful people pose for him, and us, the viewers, absolutely adore it.
I'm not a very technical photographer, so I think the answer to that is that mine is in the connection with the people. And if you look in the eyes in my portraits, Testino does it as well. I think there are people... My favourite thing when people leave my session is to say, I don't really think I've been photographed. I don't feel like we've been through a session, which is the opposite of some photographers where it's all about the exact lighting and the exact shutter speed and f-stop. And that, I think, takes away from the personal element. So there's two things for me. One is the process when you're with them, and it's all about relating to the person. I just have to have a camera. It's not interesting to me, the technical side, but I obviously have to have that. And then the second thing is the editing, because I have to know, after I've done a series of portraits, whether that image matches the person I met and whether it's the real person. It might look brilliant or it might look terrible, but it's got to match the real person for me to be a good portrait. And I think if you look at other portraits, you can tell the people who relate to people immediately because the person looks relaxed. You can see it's a real person. They're not putting... You can pose and still be yourself, like Jack White, or you can be natural and still yourself. Do you know what I mean? It's all about a real connection with the person.
But so does that mean you don't do any airbrushing?
I do it when I'm asked to. I'm not a fan of it, and I have to do it a lot more in America. And I shouldn't name names, but it's there are certain people for whom it's... If you don't do it, they don't regard it as a photograph. Whereas if you do it quite a lot, I don't regard it as a photograph. So it's an interesting negotiation. And I think that's a whole different skill to me. And that it can be done to a point where I no longer recognise it as my photograph. It might have been done... It might as well have been done by a robot. In America, I'm more known for being gritty and realistic than being LA smooth. But it's I think it's a fascinating area, actually, because if you go back through history, you'll see photography has always done it. It's just it used to take a long time and it used to be harder. But even the royal wedding portraits, I've just done a programme with the BBC on royal wedding photography, and we were discussing this through, but photographs from 1850 onwards of portraits were retouched enormously. So it's always happened. And photography in itself is a trick of sorts. So it's a fine balance, but I just think people today have gone far too far. In fact, I'm thinking of setting up some sort of thing called Honestly or something like, and you sort of only show photographs that have been done without it, of lots of different people. I don't know whether to do it online, probably.
Do you have any funny stories from any of the photo shoots?
Oh, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I'm sure there are. I remember going to Anthony Hopkins' house to do the first time I ever photographed him in Malibu in LA. And it was the first time I'd had some new lights in London, new flashlights. And it was the first time I'd taken them abroad. And I don't know why, because normally I hire them, and I'd forgotten that they wouldn't work in America. So I took all this equipment, plugged it all in, nothing. No lights, nothing. And then Anthony Hopkins came from his house, completely relaxed and no hair, makeup, and said, we're not going to use lights, are we? I just love natural light. And I went, oh my God, there is a God. It was a touch and go moment. There are other lovely moments, but I think that's the closest to disaster I've come, and he saved me.
That was British photographer Cambridge Jones telling us about a photo shoot with Anthony Hopkins that could have turned into a complete disaster, but thankfully it didn't. The legendary department store Goom is currently hosting the work of this amazing photographer. The exhibition is called Royalty, Politics and Hollywood, so Muscovites get to see stunning shots of people who are in those fields. What's interesting about his work is that he turns them into themed projects. So not only do you get a picture of a well-known person, but you also get to discover something else about them. For example, in one of his exhibitions, he had photographs of various celebrities, all of which were accompanied by a song. So as you stood there looking at the photo, you could pick up the headphones and listen to what that person had to say about their favorite piece of music. Well, since I got the chance to talk to Cambridge Jones, I asked him how he chooses the theme for each project.
It's an interesting thing, this. I call it my sort of third dimension, because I'm aware that people are so blasted with photography that everybody has photographs every day in every way, from the back of their cereal packet to the billboards on the side of the street to when they turn a TV on. There are stills, even in moving pictures, there are stills. That it's almost become devalued in a thing. So to get people to stop and look at a picture in two dimensions, I've worked out, requires them to be tricked. So you give them a third dimension, which isn't really what interests me. I'm not interested in the fact. So I've used songs, I've used literature, I've used their voices. But actually for me, that's not the interesting bit. It's the bit that usually gets the attention and it holds the viewer to watch what's actually in front of them. But it doesn't interest me particularly. It's just a way of, it's marketing, I suppose. It's the way I've learnt to make them stop and look at a picture. Because I don't know if you've seen people, I'm sure you have, but you go to the opening of a gallery or even a gallery, it'd be interesting to watch people downstairs. They sort of just walk by them all and it's like, oh, I've been to that one, that was good. And they probably can't remember any picture. But if you make them, and I usually do it with headphones, so I've had people choose their favourite song, I've had them choose their favourite piece of Shakespeare or poetry, and I've had the last one I did in LA at the moment is where they talk themselves about who inspired them. And just the process of getting people to stop and listen actually, ironically, is about the photograph, even though they don't think it is, because then they're stuck in front of it and they have to look at it. So that's what I call my third dimension. It's not of interest to me, but it helps me deliver the two dimensions that I want to deliver.
Out and about.
Today it's all about photography. I am talking to British photographer Cambridge Jones, who has graced us not only with his incredible work, but also with his presence. After hearing his funny story about Anthony Hopkins, I just couldn't let him go without asking him to share another one. Here's what he had for us.
I have to be very careful because the stories they could end my career. There was a very interesting shoot recently with Shirley Bassey, Dame Shirley Bassey. She's a singer who did some of the James Bond themes, and she's from Wales, where I'm from, and she's a beautiful lady. And we shot in a hotel, a famous hotel in London. And she's such a well-known, respected person that I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know whether I thought she might be a bit difficult to do anything. So when we met, we had a glass of champagne together and we chatted, and we were both from the same country, and so it was all going very, very well. And about half an hour later, we were having such fun. She was literally rolling around on this antique table that prime ministers and kings and queens used to use, and I took some amazing photographs that I showed her afterwards, and she loved, and she wanted to use on her Christmas card. And then I got a call from the hotel who'd seen them. Oh, I think I said this is the one we're using. And I got a call from the hotel, the guy who'd been in charge of the shoot. He said, if you use that photograph, I will lose my job. And I said, well, why? And it's a great photograph. It's Dame Shirley being really relaxed in a beautiful setting of kings and queens and red silk and a beautiful wooden table. And he just said, the hotel doesn't think it's very in keeping with the hotel's reputation. And it was an interesting point because there was no legal reason. I didn't have to agree. And I was sort of tempted to go ahead with it anyway, but I didn't want to make him lose his job. But in the end, Dame Shirley took the decision for me, and she said, let's not use it. But it's an interesting thing again about, I think I'm just taking a great portrait, but everyone else has got their eye on different elements of it. And I forgot that the hotel would have a view on the portrait as well, even though they would let us shoot it.
I must say that this was one of the best interviews so far. Not only was Cambridge Jones interesting to talk to, but he seemed to really love what he does. And it's a breath of fresh air to see photographs without the crazy effects, but something that is based on traditional principles and is all about the subject. As I was leaving, he gave me a little box, and I didn't realize what it was at the time. Once I left the museum, I looked at it and realized that it was a deck of cards. The box had his logo, and inside were 52 of his portraits. First of all, since I didn't get the chance to say this earlier, thank you very much. It's the best gift ever. And second of all, how brilliant is that? It's the best form of marketing I've seen so far. I'm obviously going to use the cards, so my friends will see them and then they'll tell their friends about this cool photographer who took pictures of all these famous people and made cards out of his shots. I absolutely loved it. And that just shows you the kind of man he is. Very clever and creative. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. I hope you've enjoyed the program and been out and about with me, Marina Kosterva, and